Hey everyone, recently we got the release of the Tokyo Ghoul PTB and the new killer of Kaneki. Today I'm going to be looking over Kaneki himself, but also the wider patch and the many different changes that have happened within it. Big quality of life things that were mentioned in the recent health update post, and also things that weren't mentioned there like changes to certain killers like Xenomorph and Legion. So to start out, I do want to talk about Tokyo Ghoul and Kaneki as the new killer. It is a solo killer chapter, so this is all the content we're actually getting, with a solo original survivor coming next to sort of pair up with this, although they're not going to be connected. One of the big conversation points I've seen around this chapter already is if Kaneki really fits a DBD. Not everyone is happy that we're getting anime in the game. It's not technically the first anime property though, with us having an original one being the Skull Merchant. But, you know, I guess we know how that turned out. I do think though that they managed to translate this character very well into the game, with Tokyo Ghoul always having a horror theme throughout. So the new killer and his new power is quite interesting. He has these tentacles, and by its description alone, it did sound a bit like it was going to be a second Wesker, but this isn't really the case. He's actually quite different with the way he bounds about. He's able to shoot out his tentacles and pull himself toward various areas. He's a bit closer to Blight, I would say, instead of Wesker, but even then he's very different. He's able to bound about, attaching to walls to pull himself to certain locations, and he's also able to directly attack survivors with this, sort of sucking in their blood it seems, and enraging him, which ups the amount of times he can do these bounds and also allows him to stun survivors. Overall, he is just really fun. It's a fun power. It's certainly a very unique way to play the game, being able to bound around the map, attaching onto various walls and surfaces. It's something that overall I think should be seen in a positive light. It's another killer I think that's going to get a lot of love, similar to characters like Wesker and Blight, mainly for their movement capability. I think Kaneki is going to get the same love here. I basically don't really have much bad to say about the power. Overall, I think it's fun, it's going to have a lot of potential. I think the downsides are mainly just coming in the form of the typical issues that powers have when they first come out, which is some bugginess, some sort of like collision issues now and then when you're doing some bounds, and things like that. But aside that, the power is great. It's a little map dependent here and there. I did struggle on some maps more than others, but in general, it's a really solid power. I think it's a lot of fun. I think overall it's going to be received quite well. In terms of how the character is presented and the lore, I do really like it actually. It's the lore takes him from the point where I think a lot of people were assuming he was going to be taken from, which is this point at the end of the first season of Tokyo Ghoul, after he's gone through some pretty bad stuff. And this is essentially the moment he enters into the fog. And basically it works out, if you're wondering. If you've not read the story or you've not seen the show or whatever, the lore works out pretty well. It works out, it makes sense. One thing I was a bit disappointed with though is his lack of sort of voice lines. He does seem to sort of mutter some things every now and then, but he doesn't say too much, and most of the time he's just going rah, 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 every time he leaves. That's a little annoying. It's a bit too frequent for my liking personally. Yeah, especially when he's jumping, and in the lobby he does it a lot too. You know, I get it, he's suffering, he's a ghoul, he can't eat burgers, but you know, it's a little much. I think they could tone that down a little bit. And I'd like to see some sort of voice lines added, but I mean, I'm sure at this stage that's not really possible. It just feels like with a solo killer like this, you really want all of those elements there, so I was a little disappointed by that, but it's hardly a big deal. Coming onto his perks, I'll say they're nothing particularly special, I think, but they are quite cool, and I do like them overall. I think they're good additions to gameplay. They don't feel like they're fulfilling sort of perk slots that already exist. They're providing something unique and different. None of them are particularly overpowered, none of them are really weak though either, which is always a good thing. So I think having them all in this sort of in-between area is completely fine. I think some of them, you know, do have potential to be quite strong as well. So overall, I think perks, another thumbs up. The final thing I will say before we leave this off, and I do want to be mostly positive because I did overall really enjoy playing him. I enjoy how he looks in game. I think everything's great. I do think it was disappointing how we didn't get much marketing for this chapter. You know, there wasn't I think, any lead up at all. I don't remember there being any teasers. I don't think there was even a trailer dropped when he was released on the PTB. It all seems very rushed and sort of like an afterthought, which I think is a shame, especially with, you know, last year seeing these amazing campaigns like with The Unknown. It really makes you want to go back to that. But again, that's sort of a minimal issue. The character's amazing, so it's, you know, it'd just be nice if it was, you know, teased more. The next thing I actually wanted to talk about was the Eyrie of Crows rework, and also the new map, which is called Dead Sands. That's what it's called. And this map is better, I think, than the old Eyrie of Crows. I think this new Dead Sands map has the shack at the center of the map and has various tiles surrounding it. It's not all too dissimilar from something like Rotten Fields. It's one of those maps where it doesn't have a central structure and the shack is sort of taking its place. Overall, I do think it's an improvement over Eyrie, just because that central Eyrie structure is so powerful, and it still is in the new version of Eyrie of Crows as well. But I do think the realm as a whole, which is called the Forsaken Boneyard, has been improved, especially with things like collision. I think it felt a bit smoother from what I experienced, at least, and the tiles in general felt a bit better. There are still some in there that I'm not really a fan of, but in general I think this was a big improvement, and I would like them to do this with other maps. I don't think they necessarily need to keep adding additional maps onto these realms though. You know, for something like, I don't know, if they were to do this to Garden of Joy, say, I wouldn't want them to do that. I'd want them to just fix the core map first, focus on doing that, and then maybe try and add a new map afterwards. I do like the new map, but again, it's one of those things I just feel like, you know, focus on doing that first. So the next updates we had was a killer update to the Legion, and Legion actually got a huge buff wall, which is quite nice to see, because whilst Legion can be a little annoying, they also do deserve this wall of buffs, because, you know, they've had a lot of cooldown issues for a long time. Their stun duration is really long for what they're actually able to do. They can be annoying, which I think is why Behavior is hesitant to buff them, is because of how Deep Wound works. But I think with their recent changes to Deep Wound, and all the changes they've been doing, and, you know, the quality of life improvements to the HUD and stuff like that, I think they've decided finally, okay, we can probably buff Legion and it's going to be fine. And yeah, it is. It's pretty much fine. What they did specifically is they've decreased the fatigue duration to 2.5 seconds, down by 0.5, increased their movement speed during fatigue to 2.3, increased duration of Feral Frenzy to 11 seconds, decreased Feral Frenzy cooldown to 15 seconds, increased bonus movement speed gained per hit during Frenzy to 0.24 meters per second. So they're all really good changes. It's mainly just speed, extra cooldown, and a slightly extended power. All of these things feel really nice though. I've seen some gameplay, people are able to sort of actually use their power in sort of in more of a chase focused way. Like you can sort of play around, you know, stronger tiles like Shack by, you know, vaulting the window and then cancelling your power, or, you know, stronger main structure buildings. It seems good overall. The Xenomorph was the other killer who got quite a substantial change in this patch. Granted, again, these are just PTB changes, these things could change. But for now, these do look really bad. And that's coming from me, who's a big time Xenomorph hater. I really don't like Xenomorph. I think Xenomorph is silly, unfair. I've never liked the tail attack. That's my issue with the Xenomorph, really, is the tail attack. And the turrets a little bit too. I just find the turrets annoying. But the tail attack is my main issue. And what they've done is they've nerfed the tail attack by adding a slightly longer delay from when it releases, and they've also heightened the volume for survivors when you use it as the killer. These both sound like really good changes, and when I read these in the patch notes before the PTB dropped, my reaction was, oh, these are really good. That's basically what I wanted. I wanted to be a bit more signaled. I wanted, you know, to be able to actually tell when it was happening, and I wanted a bit of time for me to actually be able to react to the tail when it was striking me. The issue is this doesn't seem to have worked all too well, because apparently it's actually taking a lot longer than 0.35 seconds to do this. So whilst the other changes may be sort of okay, this one seems to be a bit bugged. So if they smooth it out after the PTB, these two changes might still be fine, but there's the other ones which are the bigger issue, which is to do with the turrets, and it's essentially causing Xenomorph to almost forced to be kicked out of its power after a certain amount of time due to the way the turrets and the flames now work. I'm not going to be that good at explaining it. I watched a Mr. Headache video I would recommend checking out. He lays it out all really well and explains exactly why this is terrible. And again, as a Xenomorph hater, it does sound terrible. I don't like how the Xenomorph is currently, but that doesn't mean that I want every Xenomorph player to be miserable, or the character to be completely gutted, which is essentially what this update is going to do. So I hope this doesn't come to life. I really hope it doesn't. The final character that got some changes was Chucky, and these are just good. They're very simple. He got a cooldown to his power recovery, and he got a boost to the time it takes for him to hit max speed. That's all he really got. It's fine though, they're both good changes. Next up we have the surrender option. This was introduced due to the big issues surrounding slugging, mainly at least, and the go next meta, would you call it meta? The go next epidemic, as some have been calling it. This has been added to allow people to essentially give up during a match. It allows both killers and survivors to do this. For killers, they can do it when all remaining survivors in the trial are all bots, and they can also do it when no generator has been completed within the last 10 minutes. Now, these both sound pretty okay on paper, especially the bots one. If all the survivors are bots, I think it makes complete sense. You give up the match, you don't want to play against bots, that's fine, I think. I don't see any issue with that. Personally, I can't even remember the last time when I faced just a full team of bots from everyone DCing. I don't think that's even happened in, you know, a couple of years probably, so. But the other one, when no generator has been completed within the last 10 minutes, this does sound a bit dodgy, because it could very well lead to people wanting to stealth or prioritize stealth. You know, on the survivor side, if there's two of you left, the killer's, you know, like searching the map, and you decide to just wait them out, what's going to stop the killer from just sort of giving up? It creates these situations where if you're a survivor and you do want to progress the game, but your teammate's not helping, and then eventually the killer sort of can just give up the game for you, it's just a bit unfortunate. I understand it's also frustrating for the killer, but it's one of those things where it feels like, well, if people are still partaking in the trial, it doesn't seem all too fair. So there is an issue with that. It's one of those things where it's like, there's too many complicated scenarios where this can come into play. I think ultimately it's probably fine if you can give up in this instance, but I do think it's a little, I don't know. There are going to be scenarios where it's not going to feel nice to happen, I think. For survivors, they're able to give up when all other remaining survivors are bots, which makes sense, I think, and when all survivors are in the dying state. The bots one, again, I think is fine. I think this one is a similar situation. If all your teammates are bots, they've all given up, they've all gone next, what's the point in staying? I think that's perfectly fine. You can give up, go next, great. When it comes to all survivors in the dying state, this is one I don't like all too much, because it's one of those things where, you know, there's times when games can be recovered. Someone can get a 4%, someone might have Unbreakable and save the match. So just the fact that all the survivors are in the dying state doesn't mean the game's over. You know, someone could wiggle as well. It's one of those things where games can be turned around, and to me that's a really core part of gameplay too in DBD, is those moments when you sort of recover or you make like a cool save or play. Maybe it doesn't end up in you winning or escaping the match as survivor, but it's still a moment that's nice to have, I think. So, I don't know, I wasn't the biggest fan of this one upon reading it, but I do equally sort of get it. I just hope it doesn't lead to people being too fast to jump to, you know, just giving up immediately. This is what I worry about mainly with these changes. Whilst I think they're great for what they're tackling, I do worry they're going to become, I don't know, a means for people to give up too easily, I guess is how I'd phrase it. A bit like they do now with the go next thing, you know? It's just, oh, I'll just take chances on hook and go next. You know, they're not really thinking about much else. They just want to be like, okay, whatever, fine, this match is done, I'm going next. It feels a bit like that, just in a different way and a more sort of official way. We've also got some changes to some killer perks and some survivor perks. Alien Instinct got a nice buff. Deathbound also got a nice buff too. Hysteria also got a nice buff. Knockout got a complete rework, and it's going to be quite interesting how this works out, because this causes survivors to get 5% hindered for 5 seconds once they're 6 meters away from a pallet they just dropped. This is a tough one to judge, but it's another perk that does feel a bit like, oh, it benefits the killers who need it the most, if that makes sense. For example, a character like Blight could use this, so the survivor gets slowed and Blight's on them within like a couple seconds. You know, it sort of benefits a character like that insanely, but then benefits a character like Trapper sort of minimally. I don't know. It's obviously a tough one to balance. There's 40 killers now with Kaneki, so hey, that's the thing. Yeah, it's tough, I know. Overall, I think it's a nice rework. I think the old knockout was, it was designed to just be used in an unpleasant way. So I think this one, it's an improvement. Nemesis got a buff as well. Survivor perks. Quick and Quiet got a cooldown reduction, so nice buff. Deception also got a nice buff. Dance With Me, also nice buffs. Again, these ones I'm not going to go into detail for. They're essentially just the same perk, just with buff numbers or lowered cooldowns, things like that. Red Herring also got a buff too, which is... I'm so shocked this perk... They remembered this perk existed. But this perk has gotten a change. Getting a buff, unfortunately it's not a rework, which is what I would have hoped for this perk, because this perk is one of the most useless things ever. But it's nice it got something, I guess. So yeah, that's the Kaneki update, or PTB 8.6.0. Overall, I'm actually really happy with this. I think there's been some really solid changes in this update to perks, sort of quality of life stuff with the perks at least. The killer powers are a bit more debatable. I think both Legion and Xenomorph have sort of like, they're on like the opposing sides of what to do and what not to do with the characters. Legion have been sort of really nicely improved. They've not been, you know, changed or reworked substantially, but they didn't really need to be. They just needed a few number buffs, maybe a few other things here and there too, but in general it's a positive change. For Xenomorph, whilst again I do feel like Xenomorph was a little problematic with how they worked, but regardless they didn't need to be completely destroyed like this. Like this Xenomorph nerf is way too substantial. And then there's ones like Chucky, again similar to the Legion one, I'll just put it in that same bracket of, yeah, it's nice. Kaneki himself, again, great, really cool power. I think the lore fits well, I think the visual design looks great. The moaning's a little annoying, and I'm worried about it being really buggy. But aside that, I think this is a really positive update for DBD when it rolls out to live. Again, I think the main issue here is the Xenomorph changes, not all of them, mainly to do with the turrets and fixing the apparent tail attack sort of delay issues. And then also for Eyrie, I don't know, Eyrie's Eyrie at the end of the day, so maybe that's just, you know, it's just always going to be not my favorite thing. But I do like the new Dead Sands, and I like the fact that they're reworking it a bit. So yeah, that's that. Let me know your thoughts too. Thanks for watching, and goodbye.